on, everybody? It is Super Bowl week for the golf schedule. We've got ourselves Tour Championship week. Obviously, the capstone event for this entire season, but more than that, I'm going to be there in person. I always go up to Atlanta, able to see the action in person, which adds a little bit of excitement on my end. On top of that, though, going to have an inside scoop of what to expect. Going to be walking the course on Wednesday, there for Thursday through Sunday. So if you're looking for an idea of how the course is playing, I'm pretty sure I can give that to you. So looking forward to that. But more than that, we've got ourselves one of the best events of the year. I mean, you're talking about the 30 best players teeing it up. And I know there's that staggered start format, but year after year, it always seems like it comes down to the end. You know, 3 or 4 players within 4 or 5 strokes that definitely have a chance to bring home the hardware on Sunday. So that is definitely something that I'm looking forward to. But in this video specifically, going to cover exactly what to expect from East Lake Golf Club. So this is our course breakdown. Going to touch on some of the course specifics or go hole by hole, breaking down exactly the type of shots that players will be facing around this type of track. And then at the end, give you an idea of the exact type of players that I'm looking to target both from a fantasy and betting side for this week. In general, that'll be key stats. We'll talk about a few comp courses around the tour that I expect to play similarly to what we see here at East Lake. And by the end, you'll be an expert on what to expect this week. So a lot to talk about. These are long videos. Let's go ahead and hop right on in. East Lake Golf Club, a par 70 designed by Tom Bendelow, situated just outside of a beautiful Atlanta, Georgia, and kind of like Augusta. You know, you can't tell that you're in a city. I mean, quite literally, you're within a mile or two of downtown Atlanta, and you can hardly tell that's the case. A beautiful setup, a lot of nature out there, and more importantly, a golf course with a lot of strategy. Now, Tom Bendelow, not necessarily known for being that type of designer. I mean, you don't see his courses very often on the PGA Tour, or really any professional circuit, but it definitely has held up over the years. This golf course was designed back in the early 1900s, so it's not really a classical era design. It came out a little bit after that, towards the 1940s, 1950s, when it actually opened up to the public. But this track at a par 70 really brings everything to the table. And let's talk about a few of those key characteristics. First off, just to give you an idea of last year's conditions, it played a little bit softer than most. They had 8 inches of rain the month leading up to the event, which meant that the greens were a lot more receptive. The fairways were also a lot easier to hit. But one thing on the downside was the rough was also a lot more lush. There was a lot more growth there, and it was really hard to dig balls out of that surface. So last year, the scoring average was 68.81, so 1.19 shots under par, which is actually slightly easier than what you see most years here at East Lake. This is not an easy track, mostly due to how narrow the fairways are. You're dealing with absolute ribbons, only 24 yards wide. Greens that are, right around tour average, but they have quite a bit of undulation to them. But most importantly, that Bermuda grass rough, those really narrow fairways, makes this a ball striker's paradise. And for the Tour Championship, our capstone event, that is exactly what the PGA Tour wants. They want this to be a course where whoever hits the ball the best this week is going to find the most success. And that is exactly what we get here. It is the perfect golf course for the last event of the year. So just some specifics: 74 bunkers on property, so a little bit less than usual. Only 5 water hazards, but only 4 holes actually have the water in play. So there are, a few notable ones like the par 3 there in the back 9, which is almost an island green. But outside of a few of those notable holes, there isn't that much water, but there is plenty of trouble out there. I already mentioned how narrow the fairways were, but on top of that, you're dealing with tree-lined fairways. And if you end up in the trees in the pine straw, a lot of times it's just a chip out, right? And you're chipping out to that narrow fairway, hoping to get up and down with the wedge. You're going to see that a lot more often here than what you saw last week. At Wilmington, they did have tree-lined fairways, but they really weren't all that dense. There wasn't any of that pine straw. In fact, a lot of the areas players were hitting into were good spots to be in. You'd rather be in there than the 3-inch rough that was only 4 to 5 paces off of the fairway. It was a lot harder to hit out of that. It was lush. It wasn't trampled down by the spectators. This week, that effect is not going to be a thing. I mean, a lot of players complained about that at Wilmington Country Club. The fact that you can miss so far offline and completely get away with it. At East Lake, you're not going to get away with that. It is a strategic golf course. Like I said, Ball striking is rewarded handsomely around this venue. You see that with the greens too. Last year, they were hit at a 67.5% clip, which is right around 1% less than the tour average. They ran it 12.5s, and anytime you get these Bermuda grass greens, on top of them being a little bit trickier to putt, they're also really tricky to pitch onto. And because the fairways here are zoysia grass, you're going to get a similar effect to what we saw at Memphis. If you remember, we had the zoysia fairways, which meant that players were spinning the ball a lot more than usual, and around the green, they were dealing with a lot of problems. Zoysia is kind of like Bermuda, where it's super sticky, and when you have that zoysia fairway grass and then those Bermuda greens, I mean, you saw what happened there at TPC Southwind. And can get really dicey really fast. When you're playing down green, you're going to have almost no ability to stop the ball. I mean, you saw that on 18, if you remember, when the pin was down near the lake. And then on the converse side, when you're hitting into the green, even when you're just putting into the green on a Bermuda surface, it's going to be hard to even get the ball to the hole, particularly when it's uphill. So it's a tricky surface. The guys that tend to have a lot of success on Bermuda tend to have a lot of sustained success because they're so used to those conditions. The fairways, like I mentioned, very, very narrow, only 24 yards wide. And last year they were hit at a 65% clip, which, believe it or not, was only 1% lower than tour average. But remember, I talked about how receptive, how wet the golf course was last year with the 8 inches of rain that they got the month prior. That is not going to be the case. So fairway percentages should be lower this time around. Same thing with the GIR percentage. I would expect it to be at least maybe a 3 to 4% difference. The rough is a 2.5 inch Bermuda grass, and the missed fairway penalty last year was 0.46 strokes. That was only 0.1 strokes harder than tour average. So it's not like you're dealing with 4-inch Bermuda, US Open type of rough out there. But anytime you get that Bermuda grass, it's going to be a little bit dicey to hit out of. All right, now let's get a feel for this course hole by hole. So hole number 1, 466, it is not a handshake for you. You have the trees down the right. This water in front isn't even remotely in play. I mean, it's one of the few water hazards that they say is quote-unquote in play on the tournament sheet, but it's definitely not. You have fairway bunkers down the left. These trees down the right make any miss into this patch here almost impossible to hit the green. So this is a shot where you have to nut up, hit the fairway. You're probably hitting driver too because it's still 466 yards. And really, off the first tee, you're getting an idea of what to expect here. You're going to be punished for your misses. These fairway bunker shots aren't easy. Miss to the right, like I mentioned, you have a really hard angle into the green. And this green surface isn't very large. And realistically, this kind of is a handshake around East Lake Golf Club. A lot of really difficult holes out there. It's long for a par 70, and you'll see on every single hole a huge priority on accuracy. Hole 2 is a par 3. It's 200 yards, so it's not that long, but there's a ton of undulation on this green. So it is a birdie hole, at least if there are quote-unquote birdie holes around East Lake Golf Club, but definitely not a handshake either. Hole 3 is 391. It's on the shorter end of the spectrum for golf holes around here. It does play downhill too, so you're going to get a little bit of extra rollout here. I mean, all the land here, it slopes from our back right now to the lakes down here out front, so you're going to see a lot of undulation in that direction. So you're going to get some extra rollout. You can probably even hit an iron off the tee here. Taking driver means it's a lot easier to end up in the rough, and because of that fairway bunker, or I should say, I guess greenside bunker is probably a better word for it, in front of the green, you can't roll shots up. So if you end up in this Bermuda grass rough, you're going to have to try and hit it sky high onto the green, and then hopefully it stops because it's not going to have any spin out of that rough. So there's a huge priority on just hitting the short stuff here, probably just taking a driving iron or even like a 6 or 5 iron for some of these players to get it out there 244 yards and have a flip wedge into the green. Hole 4 is 480. It's uphill, so this is one of the more difficult holes on property. You have the fairway bunkers on the left, the tree-lined fairway to the left and the right. Like I mentioned, these trees here, they look kind of sparse, but they're large trees. I forget what actual tree they are. I'm not a arbologist person, or whatever the heck those people are called anyways. I don't pretend to be either, but they're pretty thick trees out there. So they're going uphill. It's 480 yards. I think you get the point, right? Try to get it on the surface and 2-putt, and that's going to be hard to hold a par. Hole 5 is 443, so it's going downhill back down that slope. Like I said, you're going like up and downhill for the first 5 or 6 holes here. It's relatively long just because a lot of players, aren't going to take driver off this tee. It's a relatively narrow fairway, right around just 20 yards wide. It doesn't taper off all that much, so if you are accurate with the big dog, I guess go ahead and take it out. But if you miss to the right, you're absolutely dead. This patch of trees to the right here is among the most dense on all of the property. So if you have a little bit too much side spin, end up over there, you're going to be pitching out, trying to get up and down from 40, 50 yards and save your par that way. If you miss to the left, you have a little bit of a better chance. You could probably still run up shots onto the green. But still, a lot of priority on hitting the fairways around here, which is something we'll say in almost every single hole. Hole 6 is 520 yards. It's playing way uphill, so do not be fooled here. There's going to be plenty of players that don't reach in 2, even though it's only 520. The fairway bunkers come into play. Those are almost always forced layups. If you miss in the rough, it's also going to be a forced layup because it's a blind shot uphill to a green that's relatively large, but you're adding a solid 15 to 20 yards of distance because it's that far uphill. And anytime you have a blind shot, it just drives players crazy. So you're going to see people that reach this in 2, but a majority of it will be playing it as a 3-shot hole, even though it is only 520 yards. Hole 7 is 488 downhill, so it doesn't play nearly all that distance. It plays a solid 17 yards downhill, but it's one of the harder fairways in property to hit. You have the fairway bunkers down the left, which are going to cause people to try and end up right. And then to the right, you have all these trees. So it's a lot going on there with the tee shot. Not an easy hole with plenty of bunkering there as well. Hole 8 is 455 yards. Sorry, 457, I guess. Going along the water. So the water definitely is in play on this tee shot. Almost everyone, I could just remember this from being there in person, ends up to the right over here. No one wants to hit it on one of the only water hazards on property. Like I mentioned, a lot of them, other than the par 3, aren't really in play. So you just end up over here to the right on these mounds. Now, the issue is you can't really see this over here on TV. There's a bunch of little hills over here, like little moguls. Tom Bendelow, like I mentioned, he wanted to make sure that he would penalize your misses. To the left, there's the obvious penalty. It's the lake. But to the right, it's a little bit of a hidden penalty. You have all these little nooks. You're going to have a side hill lie almost every single time if you bill out to the right. And you're in that Bermuda rough. Now, the fans are able to stand like right here. I can just tell you again because I was there last year. So it is a little bit trampled down if you miss really far right. But still, it's a tough hole. A lot tougher than it looks on paper. Hole 9 is 238 yards. It is a beast of a par 3. Great little infrastructure, great little build out around this green too. So there's going to be a ton of fans watching at hole number 9. Water is not in play. It's just a long hole that you will see a few birdies at, but like almost all long par 3s, just try to get it on the surface and 2-putt and get your par. The back 9 heads to the other side of the property. It's, I would argue, the actually easier side just because there's a few less trees there on the back 9. It's 420 yards. If you're, actually, they're not starting on hole 10. They're going to be starting on hole 1 for every single tee time. I should know this. But if they were starting on hole 10, right, it'd be an easy way to start your event. They're not going to do that to you at the Tour Championship. They're not going to hold your hand when you make it the whole way to the Super Bowl for the season, right? They're going to start to test you a little bit, and that's what you see. Hole number 10 would be a handshake, but it's not hole number 1. It is the easiest hole on property, if I had to say so myself. I mean, other than the par 5s. Easiest par 4 on property. Hole 11 does have the water in play here. It's 215 yards. It's your run-of-the-mill par 3. Just don't hit it in the water. Get it on the surface and 2-putt. That's the name of the game here at East Lake. 390 for this par 4 here at number 12. It's a straight up hole. It's not really doglegging from left to right. You do have the fairway bunkers that protect the landing area quite well. And the green, you also have quite solid bunkering that protects this green, but this is another easy hole. Like I mentioned, the front 9 a little bit of a bear. Hole number 10 was relatively easy. Hole 12 is also relatively gettable. Hole 13 is also relatively gettable. It's flat and it's only 445. So on the front 9, if you can get out of there with like 2-3 under par, I mean, you're sitting pretty. You could go 3-4 under par very easily on the back 9 and do some solid scoring there. Hole 14 is 553. It is a par 4, so it's one of the longest par 4s that you're going to see. It does play way downhill though, so there is quite a bit of slope here. Your tee shot plays like 10 yards downhill. Your next one's like 5 to 10 yards downhill, depending on where you end up hitting it. So it is easily reachable in 2, but anytime you have over a 500-yard par 4, it's going to be dicey at best. Hole 15 is the water hole I was talking about. Now, this is like one of the most difficult holes, period. It's way more difficult than what you have there at TPC Sawgrass there for the 17th, because this is 220 yards over water. I mean, I play this on video games from time to time, like a PGA 2K, and I hit it in the water most of the time. You're going to see a ton of water balls here, and even the drop zone is still like 150 yards, so it's like you're hitting your recovery shot from the tee boxes there at TPC Sawgrass. So it's a difficult hole. You're going to see a ton of players in this bunker to the left, because it's one of the few areas, if you can hit it into that bunker, it'll stay there, right? Whereas you might get a firm bounce off the screen and end up in the water. It's a lot of fun to watch in person. They have massive build outs over here to the left, so this whole area right here will be covered in a build out, and it'll be a lot of fun for fans. Hole 16 is 458 back uphill, so it is a little bit more difficult. It's not quite the handshakes of hole number 10, 12, and 14, but it's uphill. It should be relatively gettable because it's not all that long. Hole 17 is a flat hole. It just goes diagonal across the property. In fact, one of, I believe, only like 2 or 3 holes on the entire property that does so. So it is flat, 445. It's relatively simple, to be honest. There's not much there with hole 17. It's as run-of-the-mill a hole as you're going to get. Hole 18, though, a par 5. This is an epic hole if I've ever seen one. A massive drop-off. So you're playing from way up on the hill. Just to give you an idea, right? Like, this is one of the hills over here. The other hills on the other side of the property where, a lot of those holes were running up the slope, up to that hill. These run down to the lake too, right? Everything is running down to the lake. It's like a little valley there. Where these lakes are. This is massively downhill. It's a fun hole. There's the trees to the right, trees to the left. Bryson, when he hit his shot, he ended up like over here in this other fairway last year, and he hit it like 360, just absolutely mashed it. And if you remember, someone picked up his golf ball. A fan went out there, picked it up. I actually saw the fan do that last year, which was a little bit comical for me to see. But yeah, most players are going to try and get it out here in the fairway. You're going to see some guys that get it down there the whole way to like 360. 300, actually, I think 360 might even get you a whole way like up to the lake out there. Yeah, so that's what Bryson was doing last year when he was hitting good tee shots, and that leaves you like 210 yards into the green, which isn't an easy shot either. Now it's flat. It's not like you're getting the downhill aspect, which makes it easier to reach, but it's a tough green. A lot of undulation on it. It's got plenty of bunkering to it. If you end up getting on in 2, it's going to be stealing at least a shot to the field. It's a par 5, but even like the 520-yard par 5 on the front 9, it is far from a gimme birdie. All right, now that we've seen the golf course, let's talk about my key stats for analysis. At number 1, we've got shots gained approach. And like I mentioned off the hop, this is a ball striker's paradise. You are rewarded here handsomely for how well you strike the golf ball. So it's not a surprise that at number 1 we have shots gained approach. I guess the more important part here would be what we're hunkering down on, which for this week is mid to long iron play. You probably noticed that a lot of the holes play uphill. You're going to be clubbing up a lot more often as so. And even the holes that are downhill tend to be a little bit longer, right? Like the 530-yard par 4. So even on the downhill holes, you're still having long irons into the green. So ball striking with, let's say, that 150 to 175, that 175 to 200-yard range are going to be especially important this week. Another thing I'm looking at is shots gained out of Bermuda rough, and also shots gained approach off of Georgia fairways. They're both extremely unique. I mean, first off, Bermuda rough, you get almost no spin out of it. You get those flyers, also a little bit of those dead shots. And then off of Georgia fairways, you're getting pristine, almost carpet-like conditions where some players thrive on it and some players really tend to struggle. So looking at some of the approach stats from TPC Southwind could bear to be extremely fruitful, because that's one of the only courses on tour all season that we see Georgia fairways. And of course, those were the first event for the playoffs. On top of that, we've got shots gained putting on Bermuda. That's there at number 2. Anytime you're at a Bermuda golf course, you want to focus on the guys that are specialists on that type of grass. So that's something that I'm considering for this week. Putting's always important in general, right? There's putting specialists. You always got to include it in your modeling, but particularly at a track where you have all this undulation. I mentioned it from time to time during the course breakdown, but there's plenty of holes where, you're going to have triple, quadruple breakers if you have that 30 to 40 foot putt, and taking the guys that historically are the best readers of greens, tends to be very useful at this golf course. Just think of a Billy Ho, right? Great putter on Bermuda. He's had success here. Jordan Spieth, for example, historically, that's one of his favorite surfaces, has had a lot of success. And same thing with Xander Schauffele. All of them are exceptional Bermuda grass putters. Next up, we've got driving accuracy, which you could probably also tell from the hole-by-hole analysis. A lot of really narrow fairways, and also a priority on keeping yourself out of trouble. A lot of times it's not water, right? There's only really one hole where water comes into play heavily. It's more about avoiding bunkers, avoiding tree patches where you're going to be blocked out going into the green. Almost all of those are one-shot penalties, and even if they're not a quote-unquote penalty stroke, they're going to heavily impact your approach play numbers. So that's something that I'm looking at there. Driving accuracy, just keeping yourself in position. Next up, we've got shots gained around the green. That's always important, especially at a golf course with so much rough around the green. It makes a lot of those shots difficult. I'm still looking at driving distance, just not quite as important as driving accuracy or some of the other stats we've talked about. You can get a huge boost like Bryson did last year, like Cantlay and Rahm did, all of them bombers of the golf ball who played exceptionally well around this venue, but it's not the end-all be-all. Good drive percentage, another way to look at driving accuracy, birdie or better percentage. There's still plenty of birdies out there, despite it being a tough track. We talked about shots gained approach out of Bermuda rough. Distance from the center of fairway, another way to look at the most accurate drivers of the golf ball. But they're looking at the exact distance they have from the center because, the closer you are to the center, you should get a reward for that. And lastly, par 4 scoring. It is a par 70. So after all, with 12 on property, which is actually 14. I got to work on my math there, guys. 14 par 4s on property, definitely something you want to look at. Alrighty, so now let's go into the comp courses. So the types of venues that I'm looking at to try and get an idea of what kind of players might succeed here. And realistically, there are 3 tracks that I think fit the bill perfectly. You got TPC River Highlands, TPC Twin Cities, and TPC Deer Run, which you might think from a scoring perspective, what are you talking about? They're all relatively easy venues, which sure, East Lake, a lot more difficult than those tracks. But what I'm looking at here is the skill set needed for success. And Data Golf completely backs this up. These 3 courses are number 1 through 3 for their rankings. And it's all about target practice. When you miss around East Lake, you're going to feel it, right? You missed 40 to 50 yards offline, you're going to lose shots, lose strokes to the field, like you missed 40, 50 yards offline. At Wilmington Country Club, that Mickey Mouse golf course last week, you can miss 50 yards offline and be perfectly fine. In fact, sometimes you had an even better shot into the green because your lie was trampled down. It's where spectators were and whatnot. And because of all the trees that were taken out with the tornado, you have a perfect line into a green. To me, that's BS. That is the definition of a Mickey Mouse golf course. But this week, and what you saw at River Highlands, you also see at Deer Run and see at Twin Cities, is when you miss, you're gonna feel it. And at Twin Cities, at River Highlands, most of it is due to water, right? There's a ton of water around those venues. You hit it offline, you're taking a penalty stroke no matter what. At this venue, it's not really so much the water, it's the trees, it's the bunkering, all of those sort of effects that bring that same type of skill set to the top of the leaderboard. So it's something that I'm looking at. I mean, just consider Xander Schauffele has had a lot of success around River Highlands, also has had a ton of success around East Lake. You've seen similar players like Tony Finau have success at East Lake, also won at the TPC Twin Cities this year. And even with the John Deere Classic, you've seen a lot of these positional type of accurate players off of the tee have a lot of success around that venue. So guys that have succeeded around all 3 tracks are going to be guys that I'm definitely favoring this week. And it's not just, a one-on-one type of thing. If somebody had a horrible performance at one of them, it's not like I'm going to completely hold it against them, but it is a way to make some solid tiebreakers this week. So I'm definitely looking at it. If you're looking for even more comps, just think of these positional type of golf courses, even Florida swing type of golf courses. And I know, right, it's not in Florida, it doesn't have the feel of a Florida type of track, but when you miss offline at a course with water at it, it brings a similar type of skill set to the top of the leaderboard. So it's something that I'm looking at. Definitely something I use week to week in my analysis. Alrighty though, that is all I've got for this week's course breakdown. Really looking forward to this week. Going to be walking the course on Wednesday for the practice round. So make sure to stop on by for my live stream. That'll be Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Yes, still going to be doing it from up there in Atlanta. I'll give you guys an idea of everything that I saw. We'll talk about the practice round, maybe who was playing well, but more importantly, how the conditions looked. Were greens firm? Were the fairways firmer than usual? What's the length of the actual rough going into the event? All of those questions will be answered at that point, so make sure you stop on by. So looking forward to that. Looking forward to DFS embedding this week too. There's nothing quite like having a sweat in person. But before you hop on out of here, right, you that's watching right there, make sure you go ahead and smash that like button. It shows me that you're enjoying the content, and it helps me with growing the channel too, so it's a win-win, helps me out there. And also, make sure you go ahead and comment down below what you've got as the winning score. Last week, it was all over the place. I heard things from -28 the whole way to -5. My guess was -15, ended up being -14, so I was pretty close there on my score, but go ahead and let me know what you guys are thinking down below. It should be an epic one, everybody. Best of luck with whatever you're going with for this week, whether it's betting, whether it's DFS odds, or just watching, rooting on your best player, and let's get this cash.